This call is now being recorded.
Hello and welcome back to LEMN. Today is going to be a little bit different. Kicking off the show, we have Evan and Holly talking about two famous murders and mysteries today. We're missing Hoops today, but we're going to continue on, and we hope you enjoy the show of this special episode of Mystery and Murder. Let's start with you, Holly, today. What do you have to share with us?
So today I want to talk to everybody about the disappearance of the Stoddard children in 1945, and there are actually 5 children that all went missing in the same night.
Oh, I think it was 2.
Yeah, so actually this is a family of 11. There were 9 children. And so what happened on Christmas Eve of 1945, they all went to sleep. Everyone was excited for a big day of Christmas tomorrow. And in the middle of the night, the family awoke and realized that their house was on fire. So what happened is the dad tried to get everybody out, and 4 of the children and the mom all got out, and he tried to call for like the fire department and the police, and his phone line didn't work. So he ran over to the neighbor and tried to use their phone line, and their phone line didn't work. It was eventually some guy like passing by on a truck that saw the fire and called the fire department. But because this was in 1945 and most of the manpower for the fire department was overseas, like doing the war effort for World War II, it took the fire department all the way until the next morning to respond. And this happened at 1, 2 in the morning. And the fire department didn't show up until 8. So this house burned totally down to the ground by the time the fire department showed up.
Do they know if it was something that was intentional or was it accidental?
So the fire department, and also too, I just want to state that this is something, because it's such a popular mystery and there's so much conjecture over it, that people still look at this today. And it's also widely considered that the police work and the fire department work done in 1945 isn't probably up to the standards that they would do today. So, maybe let's just keep that in mind, that it's kind of considered a cursory investigation, because by the time they got there, it was pretty much just ashes of the house. Wow. So, there's no DNA or forensic testing they really could have done, but it turns out. Or
testing for kerosene or gasoline or something. It's just, did they even have people at that time investigating fires?
So you
causes them?
They had the person who was in charge of determining the reason for a fire was the fire chief, and the fire chief at the time was actually a man named F.J. Morris, and he determined it was an issue with electrical wiring that caused the fire. But later on in the story, I'll tell you, the family thinks there might have been a different reason. So anyway, remember 4 of the children got out of the house, and there's 5 of these kids that are still unaccounted for. So the fire department is shifting around in all the ash of the house and all of the debris, and they can't find anything from these children at all. Not a single bone, no evidence that these children burned in this fire.
Would they? If the rest of the building burnt to ash? Well, first let me say, before we move any further, if you're sensitive to this information, we will be talking in great depth of tragedies such as these, and to be honest, I should have said it at the top, but here is your warning moving forward that these are serious adult topics about serious events that occurred in the world and the mysteries that surround them. And what I'm curious about at this exact moment, I guess, is when a fire burnt, they said the building burnt to complete ash, right? So would it be common with your understanding of watching numerous crime shows and different things in your interest, is it normal on occasions to find bones, or were those crack and burn, because they do have a burning point?
So I actually did look this up when I was doing research over this. I do want to state first that the fire chief, F.J. Morris, it was in his opinion that he thought that the bodies and bones could have been totally incinerated in the fire. And I did a cursory Google search, nothing super in-depth, so if anybody out there has better information, please tell me. The average cremation temp of a body is 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit, and the average house fire temperature can range anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow.
But if you I also looked a little bit more into the cremation process, is there's more
embalming fluid, right?
Well, there's leftover stuff. There's stuff that doesn't burn completely. And, you know, even like bits of bone that kind of like have to be like discarded into like a special waste thing, or they have to be like smashed down into powder.
Or something.
But another thing to also consider is because the solder fire was left so long to burn, maybe it did reach on the upper end of the 2,000 degrees. And, you know, I'm not a fire expert in any means, but it does sound like that there was potential for this to be extremely hot and, you know, maybe, right?
Yeah. But the family believes otherwise.
Yes. So the family was immediately, they didn't like any of the answers to this. And there was also a couple of issues. The parents were grieving so bad over their children that they almost like kind of ignored what the town was saying that had happened. So like the town held a funeral for the 5 children and the parents didn't go, you know, because to them, their children weren't dead. And that's also kind of a common thing too. I've noticed from, you know, my extensive murder mystery watching is I think a lot of people need proof to see like when something has happened. And that's a lot of the issue like with missing people is there's always the thought that they could be out there because you don't have any definitive evidence that they're gone.
It's the difference between thinking and knowing.
Right. Absolutely. So, the Sodders had a couple of reasons to believe, in their opinion, that the fire was not due to an electrical wiring like the fire chief said. One bus driver driving by on the night of the fire said he saw people throwing balls of fire, that's a quote from Wikipedia, at the house. I don't know what you guys think that means, but that does sound dangerous.
Probably Molotov cocktails or something like that.
Right, who knows? And in the night of the fire, the Sodder wife, she heard something like banging on the house, and they believe like somebody was throwing like some type of grenade or incendiary device at the house. And they also found like this weird like plastic metal canister in the yard some days later, and it didn't belong to the family and they didn't know what it was. So maybe there's also, who knows exactly what happened. Also,
one quick thing, did anything you looked up show that this family had like somebody after them, somebody who was like intentionally targeting them? Like, were they rich people in competition with another business? Were their family involved in some type of, you know, maybe mob or some type of industry or something?
I mean, so there were a couple of things. So there was this one instance where a salesman came to the door and Mr. Sodder was rude to the man and he's like, I'm going to burn down your house and kill your kids.
Did they investigate that guy?
I think that they did and nothing ever came of it. I just think it was like a remark he made in anger because he didn't like the conversation he had with Mr. Sodder. And then I guess there was also, it's been said that the Sodder husband had been making remarks against Mussolini. And that maybe had caused some unwanted attention and maybe the children had been kidnapped. And then also too, it thought like maybe these kids had been kidnapped and like sold into labor or something like that. But those are just kind of like things that
what year did this
occur? 1945.
1945. So like the end of World War II.
I mean, if somebody in 1945 says they're going to burn your house down, I mean, it's like back then, not only could you slap your kid, but you could probably slap like other people's kids. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
right.
That's true.
And something else that I've seen from like all the murder mystery shows that I've watched, it seems like you can almost kind of do whatever you want before like 1990s, before DNA testing. Like you could just show up to a town and be like, my name is Jim Brown and here's a piece of paper that I wrote my name on to prove it. And they're like, okay. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to have any, like, no one's looking for your social security number or any of that other stuff. So, like, imagine all the things that have happened and nobody's ever
said anything.
Yeah.
I mean, serial killers back in the day, like the Zodiac killer, got away with so many murders and they couldn't track them down. And, like, today you feel like there'd be satellite images if someone was killing that many people and taunting the police like that.
Right. And so I don't know if I mentioned this, but this also happened in Fayetteville, West Virginia. And in 1945, this is a really, really small community. So I think that there's also a certain level, even like if you think about the police work in some of the small communities today, I don't think is up to par.
Yeah.
So I imagine it being the same in 1945.
Yeah, it's
right.
probably even worse than what it would
Yes.
be today.
So, because the Sodders believed that their children were not actually, another sad thing is the fire chief, in an effort to try to like make the family feel better, he buried like a cow liver on the place like where the house burnt down, and told the Sodders that that was like the heart of one of their children.
Okay, that seems like someone like trying to think on the fly though. Like, oh man,
That doesn't seem like small town cop who thinks like he's trying to do a good thing but not.
Okay, yeah, I guess maybe.
To me, it feels like on the border of I'm a part of this cover up or something, you know?
Right?
Yeah.
Is it just like willful ignorance, or is it just like, are your intentions that good, or you're just that, you know, kind-hearted and naive that you think that that would actually help someone?
Right. It was extremely like just
any cult-like behavior happening in the town. So like cult-like behavior usually centers around things like this.
Not that I had heard of, but so the Sodders dedicated the rest of their life to trying to find their missing children. And just so you know, too, the state of West Virginia issued death certificates for these kids. So the family believes that these people are still out there, but the government as a whole, these people are not alive anymore as far as they're concerned.
After a certain amount of time, that's what happens, you know, same thing with like almost POWs and stuff like that. You know, for payouts for insurance and stuff like that, they have to proclaim that, you know, these people are dead.
Right. So, and they put up at one time a $10,000 reward for information like leading to the return of their children. And in 1952, they put up a billboard on, State Route 16 in West Virginia. And it has a whole bunch of information about the fire and picture of the 5 children. And, you know, it basically says if anybody has any information to let them know. And there are family members of the Sodders as recently as 2015 that are still, you know, looking into this and trying to figure out what happened. I will say, though, that the general consensus from, you know, the internet and most of the things I read, it seems maybe likely that the children died in the fire in 1945, and maybe just the police and the officials at the time didn't have the technology or maybe even the know-how to process a crime scene to that extent. And so, and maybe that ignorance, not that ignorance is a bad thing, it's just a lack of not knowing that leads to such an intriguing mystery, because I think it is interesting to think, like, what if those kids are somewhere? What if something else did happen? I think that's the more interesting version of the story. But it's sad either way, totally.
Amazing.
Crazy. Yeah. So is that like all that's surrounding the mysteries? Have they ever found anybody tied to it? It's like, oh, the family found this guy, seems very, like, with all these mysteries, sometimes it seems like there's always one guy. It's like that's probably the most likely who did it. Like, is there a person that they can point to?
No, not any one individual. So they checked out all of the most immediate people. So do you remember how the Sodders' phone didn't work when the dad tried to call for the fire department?
Yeah.
There was a neighbor who was mad at him over, like, I don't know, some small town dispute, and cut his phone line thinking it was a power line because he was trying to inconvenience the Sodder family, but he didn't know what he was doing, I guess. And the police apparently questioned him and said that there was nothing more than, like, a neighborly dispute.
Well, couldn't he be charged with, like, negligence or, like, some charge that, like, for impeding, like, safety of another person? I feel like there's a law for that.
I mean, maybe. I don't know much about the laws in
reckless endangerment.
Virginia.
That's true. That is true.
I don't know, but there has been, like, I think it's like one of those things when people go missing, like there'll be leads from like all over the country and sometimes all over the world. Like I've seen your people in, you know, the Netherlands or whatever, and maybe it's just somebody that looks really, really like them, because the Sodder parents did follow up on all types of leads. Actually, so the Sodder dad saw a girl in a magazine, and he went to this girl's school and demanded to see her because he thought this was one of his daughters that was missing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so it was just
That's
so
sad
sad.
and creepy.
Yeah, and the school was like, no, you're a sad, creepy man. You can't be bothering like 12-year-olds. And which they should have done, absolutely. But I think it's just also the pain of the father and the parents and the family of not, not knowing, or maybe not being able to accept maybe that those children did die in that fire,
Yeah. But on the other hand, stranger things have happened. There are times like those 3 people who were in that basement back in like 2008 or whatever, and those girls who were missing for so long, like 11 years, and they escaped the basement.
Yeah.
Yes. I mean, that happens. Sometimes people do get kidnapped and carried away, and that's the creepy thing about some of these situations.
Absolutely.
Well, and I think that that's what's like the enduring mystery of the Sauter children is that because you don't know what happened, like you don't know. What if they did get taken away, or what if they did die in the fire? I think it leaves so much room for imagination and wonder.
Right.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So, Evan,
Yes,
what
sir.
mysteries of the world, tragedies do you bring today?
Well, I do have one story. When we talked about this originally, about what is the most, I don't know, I would say the most memorable true crime instance for me would be a gentleman by the name of, are you guys ready for this?
Yeah.
Yes.
John Emil List. And I'm going to talk about the List family murders.
Now, Holly, do you have any familiarity with this story?
Actually, no. Evan and I were talking about this right before we started, and I mentioned I was jealous because I not off the top of my head, I don't know anything about the List family murder.
So this is going to be a story for both of us. All right.
Yeah.
This is not blown off. Okay. We're gonna ease on into this, and I'm just gonna warn you guys, it gets a little bad, but then it comes out really strong, and it's a very, it's a very thorough story.
Okay.
But John List, oh boy, this man. He was born September 17th, 1925 in Bay City, Michigan. And I didn't even know he was a Michigander. And until I actually looked up his information. I remember the episode from Forensic Files about this, and I can't stop thinking about it. I think about it maybe once a week. If you're a true crime fan, you probably can relate. There's one case that always just like in the back of your mind, like, I wish they could use those methods or those tactics to find other people better.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
So, this man is an accountant, and the date of the murders was November 9th, 1971. He's an accountant living his best life, and then everything starts to slowly decline. His wife, who has advanced syphilis, is starting to exhibit, like erratic behavior.
Ooh.
He feels like the 70s are not a good time, full of sin. He's a good Lutheran man. He likes to take his family to church. He's very religious.
So there's a bit of self-conscious about even treating his wife's condition.
You could say. But in the Forensic Files episode, it looks like she liked to just, I guess, have a little bit of fun too.
Mm.
So he's getting a little, upset with his family's lifestyle. He's not really comfortable. And on top of all these things, he is having troubles with his job as an accountant. So in his mind, he thinks that if he can save everyone and fix everything, there's only one way to do it. Kill them all now and send them to heaven before they can sin and go to hell.
Oh, wow.
So his 84-year-old mother, his 45-year-old wife, and his his 3 children, 16-year-old Patricia, 15-year-old John Jr., and 13-year-old Fred are, you guessed it, murdered in succession. He actually, he shot his wife in the back of the head, and then he shot his mom once in the left eye. While his kids when his kids were at school, when Patricia and Frederick came home, they were shot in the back of the head. John Jr., the eldest, actually put up a fight, and he was actually gone. So he got back later in the afternoon. And when he got there, allegedly he saw the gun in his dad's hand and he tried to struggle. So he had, I believe, more than 10 gunshot wounds on his body.
Jeez, that guy must have put up a fight.
And you said this was like the oldest son?
Yes, ma'am. That was the oldest son.
Oh.
And so John, what he does now, what do you think he would do in this situation?
Well, if he's trying to get everybody to heaven on like the express ticket, and he's already did that, you would probably want to, I guess the logic would follow is, well, if you're crazy like this, you might think, now I need to go to church and ask for forgiveness, then kill myself.
You're close. You're close.
No, I vote leave. Ooh, or maybe suicide by cop.
Ooh, I like where you're going with this. You guys are very, very intuitive. But he does neither of those about us. He writes his pastor a letter explaining what he did. He felt that the 70s were a bad time and sinful. His family was succumbing to temptation, especially his daughter who wanted to be an actor. He thought Hollywood was linked to Satan, and he was like, well, here's what I'm going to head and do.
That idea is actually connected very far into the past, even to like the Middle Ages, where like acting had a certain sinfulness behind it.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the ideas of like actors are liars comes from. That subconscious understanding that actors could be liars is kind of something that was brought upon by Christianity and their views on the theater during those times.
Right, and like Hollywood is just full of sin and connected to stuff.
And then that, stacks through, politics and culture throughout time, and then we see it time and time again. And that's why it's so prominent even today.
But yeah, he was described as a weird person, kind of cold, didn't have a lot of friends, and he was the only child, and he had strict German parents. And his mom was really protective, like really overprotective and domineering. And he was a serious member of the Lutheran Church, and he taught Sunday school, man.
You're right, dude. It's always
what's that?
It's always the person of like a pillar of society.
Yeah, it's a pillar of the community. You sound like a true crime fan. I'm telling you, man. It's always a pillar of the community.
Do we know what the pastor did after receiving this letter?
We don't.
Oh.
I'm going to tell you guys what happens and pretty much why the pastor couldn't really do anything about what happens next.
Okay.
I have an idea.
Okay, so he served in the Army in World War II, and he was given a commission as a lieutenant. So he did have a master's degree in accounting, what he got from the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. But because he didn't have really good social skills, he had a problem of losing jobs and stuff. So, this is like a socially awkward person. You are really strict and devout. You didn't really have a lot of friends. You had strict parents. Then, you have this life. Everything's not going how you want it. You're thinking, I'm just going to send everybody up to, heaven above for salvation. So after doing that and writing his pastor, I'm sorry, was somebody going to say something?
I actually was. Do we know anything about his motivations behind killing his family? Was he like saving them, or was he like, I hate you guys, you ruined my life, and that's why I'm killing you?
No, his family was. Go ahead.
That's what I believe. I've watched the episode so many times and just over in my head thinking about it. But they say he had financial problems, up to like $200,000 in debt. He really couldn't hold a job steady. With the problems that he was having with his wife. Honestly, I believe he used religion as a cover-up, like a lot of people do in the serial killer realm. But they just they lie to themselves and try to convince themselves so much that they truly eventually start to believe that's actually what they're doing. You're like, I'm killing you, for salvation to save your life, but if you're such a devout Lutheran, why would you, want to commit murder in the first place? Thou shalt not kill.
Right. Like he's like talking to himself into his own crazy beliefs.
Right.
Gotcha.
Exactly. And that's, a lot of people, they think because we talk about murder is that we're obsessed with it. It's not that. It's the fact that it's hard to understand or to relate to somebody who can understand that there's a God and that there's a value in life, but they continue to go ahead and do something like this. just for clarity.
So
Right.
I'm going to throw my pseudo-psychology this way and try to guess what, like, this guy's motivation is. So if I put myself in the mind frame of, like, what this guy's life is like, I had strict parents, I went to church, as someone who went to church, you know, in the deep south, knowing how strict that religion can get to, he probably lived in life. His parents was like a burden on him, like one brick on his back, a heavy brick, a burden and strict. Now you add religion, and now he compartmentalizes all the rules and structures that are in his home that he also sees in the Bible. And the Bible has very extreme examples of discipline and, you know, remaining faithful and what you have to do and devote. You know, there's the story of, what is it, Abraham who goes to kill his son on the mountain. I can't remember what. And, you know, it's like you have to have that level of devotion, you know. That's what they teach. It's like you need to be able to sacrifice anything at any moment at God's, like, command. So if you work yourself into a mind where it's like this all-powerful being, the only place after this shitty life that I've already lived is heaven. My family's about to go through this. I haven't enjoyed life. They're not going to enjoy the rest of their life. My mom probably feels disappointed in me, and my wife has this disease. I'm going to do everyone a favor, you know, not leave the kids without a family. I'm going to kill them all and send them to heaven and ask God for forgiveness to forgive me because I'm being a martyr. Because that's the only way I can relate to an escape is maybe something with a relation with the Bible and Jesus and killing yourself and sacrificing life for sin. And those type of connections start to be made when you have that psychosis of like constantly trying to make connections and stuff like that, especially if you lack it in the world. You'll start making it in your brain. You know, my relation to God is what I care about, but it's this disconnect.
Yeah.
Pseudo. So I could be completely off the mark.
Just a disclaimer, right? That's not legal. So, but here's where it gets a little crazy, you know. So after he kills everyone, he drags his dead wife and children on sleeping bags into the ballroom of this giant 19-room Victorian mansion. He leaves his mom's body in the apartment in the attic, and it's pretty much on the third floor. But she was too heavy for him to move, literally. So he just left her up there by herself.
Wait, I'm sorry. Was this mansion, like, on the same block? Like, why this mansion? Do we know?
No, that's where they lived, in a massive 19-room Victorian mansion. Like, the house is huge.
Oh, that's really cool.
That he could have sold the house. He would have been fine.
Oh. But, you know, make a note of selling the house. I'm gonna write that down right now. When I finish the story, I'm going to bring that up really quickly because I'm glad you said that.
All right.
So afterwards, you know, he leaves the letter. He drags everybody in the living room. He says in the letter that he even prayed over their bodies after he killed them.
Ugh.
The deaths were not discovered for an entire month because the family always kept to themselves. And he had also sent notes telling everybody that the family will be in North Carolina for like a month because the children's schools and part-time jobs had stopped the families in mail and newspaper deliveries and everything. The man had he had this planned out. Like,
yeah, that kind of questions his sincerity about his apology. Well, obviously, because it's family, but even more in his psychosis. I guess it makes sense a little bit. Exactly. That he's aware that he's doing it, like.
So where was he, like, while his family's bodies are there?
I'm sorry?
Oh, yeah.
Where is he there at this time? Like, while they're just, like, rotting?
So, and that's what everybody in America wants to know. So you know where they go next? America's Most Wanted. So he makes an appearance. They say that they want him to be, or they want to, you know, feature his profile on the show because it's led to a lot of arrests. And it became the second most case in New Jersey history. The only one surpassed by that one was the Lindbergh baby.
Oh, wow.
So what happened? So it was a nationwide manhunt, like, brought upon by Unsolved Mysteries?
By America's Most Wanted, yes.
Oh, yeah, America's Most Wanted.
Yeah. So not to be confused with Unsolved Mysteries with Robert Stack.
Yep.
Totally different.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that show. So they feature the episode and they get hits and stuff, and then a manhunt ensues. And they find his car parked at Kennedy Airport, but there was no record of him taking an actual flight. And then, you know, they kept getting leads and stuff, and none of the leads actually went anywhere. So everybody is looking for this man. Anytime, anywhere. Whenever somebody thinks they see him, they call 911. They even thought it was D.B. Cooper because the faces looked similar.
And it was like a highly televised.
Right, because he was financially, you know, in the hole that, you know, maybe he did that and robbed an airplane to, you know, to break even or to live a good life again.
Oh, wow. So there's an actual theory. It wasn't just like, oh, he just had some similarities. Like, people actually believe he could have been D.B. Cooper.
Right. So,
oh, wow.
When they take the stuff to America's Most Wanted, the cops and the appropriate authorities at the time, it was technically, you know, the oldest case they had pretty much featured because it happened so long ago. And the TV program, they put on like an age-rendered clay bust that looked like him, even though this man had been in hiding for 18 years. So they go to I got the guy's name. His name's Frank Bender, and he works with clay, and he does sculpture. Then he partners up. I gotta send you guys a picture, but he partners up with the psychologist, and so they take an old picture list, and the sculpture he tries to make a recreation using the psychologist's help. They add 20 years on. So the psychologist is saying, hey, he's going to want some big, dark, thick frames because he's going to want to hide behind that to subjugate himself from, you know, all this stuff that he's done before. He's like really repressed some feelings down. So he's going to have like these huge jowls and his face is going to sag. And so when they're done, they feature the bust on America's Most Wanted. Guys, somebody calls the TV show and says, hey, it looks like my neighbor. On June 1st, 1989, 11 days after his case was broadcasted on America's Most Wanted, he was arrested while living under the name Robert Bob Peter Clark, a name that he adopted based on one of his college classmates, who actually said that he never even knew Liz.
Oh, wow.
That is insane. Get it, John Walsh. Like,
I mean, it's insane. But he was identified by a friend who had seen the feature, and in the 18 years since he committed his crimes, had been living in Denver, Colorado, and
wow,
where he remarried and started a new life and a career as an accountant. On April 12, 1990, he was convicted in a New Jersey court of 5 counts of first-degree murder.
That blows my mind.
On May 1st, was sentenced to 5 life terms in prison. He has never expressed any remorse for his crimes. Even during the interview with Connie Chung in 2002, he still thinks that he's going to go to heaven. But I mean, he looked exactly like the sculpture that this man created. I gotta send you guys the picture. But
okay, so I have a question then.
What's that?
Was he super religious in his next life? So like, do they interview people like here in Denver, and they ask them like
honestly,
what do you know about this guy?
I looked up, not necessarily. He wasn't like a devout. You know, they may have gone to church every Sunday, but he wasn't like, you know, anything extensive in any sort of community like that. It wasn't like, you know, he was a deacon or he was a pastor at this church. You know, they didn't.
Oh, then that sounds like he was ashamed of his family.
You know,
that's why he killed him.
I think this is a really interesting parallel to the Andrea Yates case in Texas. Do you guys remember that? She drowned her 5 children in the bathtub.
Yes,
now, Andrea Yates, I believe, is still alive, and I've watched documentaries about her and about like her family. And I mean, not to say like what she did is okay by any means, but it almost seemed like she said that she killed her children to save them from like the horrors of the world and before they could commit sin and go to hell. And if they died while they were still young, they would be like accepted to God. And
that's some projection stuff.
Totally. But you know, I'm just saying, like, after she killed her kids, I think she like sat there, called her husband, and like did sad stuff with her dead. You know, I don't think that she like tried to hide their bodies and ran away. Like, it almost seems like this guy say that he killed his family for a religious purpose is like such a cover. but maybe Andrea Yates really did believe, like, I don't know, it just feels like a different, like they're using religion as a different motivation, but they almost seem like kind of similar.
Yeah, I mean, she had like postpartum depression, psychosis, and like schizophrenia or something too. I mean,
Yes.
If they could have built a psychological profile for John List, if he would have actually, I don't know, maybe spoke with a psychologist or something, I feel like they may have shared, you know, some of those symptoms.
I think that is so cool about the bus thing that you mentioned about finding John List, because like how cool is that you can like take a face and be like, okay, this is what it's going to look like in 20 years, and this is what your face is going to look like in 20 years if you're harboring a deep secret. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
it's obvious that stuff like that affects the way that like you age or carry your body, and it's so crazy that it's been broken down so much to a science that like fucked this guy up. You know what I mean? Because
thankfully something like that exists today.
Right.
Like we said at the top, you know, just like Holly's case, there's not anything to do there in that situation. You know, if John List would have done that in say 1945, it might have been a completely different story. You know, he could have walked to a different town and say, "My name is this dude I went to college with."
So is John List still alive? Do you know?
He actually is not. He died, I want to say, in prison. Of pneumonia. He was 82 in 2008.
Wow.
They put it in the newspaper, but they referred to him as the boogeyman of Westfield. His body wasn't claimed, so he was later buried next to his mother in Frankenmuth, Michigan.
Do you know if his new family had like any indication, or did they just think he was like a totally normal, nice guy?
From what I can remember from the episode, they had like a witness on there, but she was like, yeah, he's like a totally nice guy, you know, nothing crazy or anything like that.
Isn't that so crazy that, I don't know, that you could get to know somebody and think that you know somebody really, really well, and then they have like this totally like crazy thing that you're like, oh my God, I can't even believe that you would ever do that. And that's probably why he didn't tell anybody that he killed his previous family, because, you know, that'd be like a deal breaker for me personally. But it's crazy that how somebody can present themselves can be so different from how they truly are. Like, people are scary.
Sure.
Yeah, that pretty much concludes my story. But now that I remember, I have written down sell the house. And when you asked me that earlier, the reason why is because, you know, he said he was having finance. I believe normally number one issue is always money. Like, if he had enough money, it wouldn't even been an issue. Like, I don't think I need to kill my family. I could just pay for them and be somewhere else.
Right.
Yeah.
So the original crime scene, the house was burned to the ground, and nobody really knows what happened. Like maybe arson or something. But along with the fire, the glass ceiling in an empty ballroom was signed Tiffany and Company Original.
Oh, wow.
I don't know if you guys know about Tiffany and Company, but
yeah,
that would have been at least several $100,000 today.
So did he not know it was there?
More.
I don't know. I have no idea.
You know what? Like, that almost makes it so much of a better story to know that he had that financial, like,
above his head, literally the entire time.
Yes. Oh my goodness.
It's like a Twilight Zone episode. It literally is almost like a Twilight Zone episode.
Yes, I think it's stupid always to kill people for money, because I feel like going to prison is never worth like any amount of money, because I think prison can suck so bad. But like, it's almost even better. Like, when you could have gone a different route altogether and still done better than the best case scenario is if your killing people plan had worked out. Like, oh my God.
Right.
That is so crazy. So I wonder what happened to that. You said it was like a stained glass ceiling?
Yeah, they just said it
probably got shattered.
The ballroom, and it was the glass ceiling in the ballroom. But the ballroom is the area where he laid his family out, though, after he killed them, which is like the ultimate ironic part for me is like, I can't do better for you. You know, you're sinning. This is the best life I can do. Under literally like a
Your
large
answer.
stack of cash. You know what I mean? Like, it's insane.
Oh my goodness, that is so unsettling. That was a great story, Evan.
It's
That
definitely one that always haunts me. I'm telling you, that's why. Just because of like everything that even happened.
I love it, and I love that there was such an ironic end. Like I just love it. If this guy he was so smart as an accountant, if he just would have thought about it a little bit more, he would not have had to do any of that. Oh, what an idiot!
Yeah. What do you do? Geez.
Well, I'd say you don't kill your family would be a good start.
Yeah, you start there for sure. That's
And
number one.
I mean, if you are financially, strapped for cash, why didn't you look into actually getting the house sold? Somebody would have came and appraised it and go, hey, is that a Tiffany's thing? Glass ceiling or whatever?
Absolutely.
Yeah. This guy has to be some type of level of intelligence. He's a college graduate. He evaded the police and investigation for, a long period of time, started a new family. Like, to juggle all that in his brain is, impressive in its own right. But just to think of a simple answer as like, oh, let me just sell the house.
Mm-hmm.
How do you not get to that point? But you can do all this other stuff to keep your life alive and out of jail, but not sell the house.
Crazy.
That is crazy. Well, you know what? That does wrap up this episode. I'm glad for those of you who stuck with us and joined. If you like this, like, comment, subscribe. And just a little, health and wellness check. We're all talking about getting mics. We also understand the quality of mics right now isn't the greatest quality and that we could definitely improve it. And that's coming up forward as we learn to do this more effectively and get better mics. So that's it for this episode. And we hope you join us next week. And that's Living Every Moment Nerdy. Goodbye, guys.
Stay lemony.
See ya.